Small step for women, something that the world was supposed to love and women were supposed to feel empowered by, but instead people called it overdramatic and a step backwards for feminism. You see, a couple weeks ago, for the first time in history, an all-female crew went up to space on Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin's new Shepard rocket. But instead of people celebrating it as an amazing moment and achievement for women, they're clowning it online. Wendy's, a fast food chain restaurant, replied to a tweet announcing Katy Perry had returned from space, saying, "Can we send her back?" Wendy, you have to stop. Welcome back to Orbit Insights. I'm Nathan Prather. Before we get into it, please subscribe if you are new to the channel. So, a bit of context. This diagram here should help you understand what going into space actually looked like for them. The total journey is 11 minutes, and the time they were technically in space for, there was zero gravity, is 4 minutes. But because I guess the media made this like such a big deal for such a long time, I remember hearing about this all-female astronaut spaceflight. They're not really astronauts, and it's also wrong to call them crew, so let's just call them passengers, really. That's what they are. They're passengers. I'll get into that. That's part of this later controversy. But they're passengers, so these passengers were in space for 4 minutes, really. So that's when there was zero gravity. The media just made such a big deal of this for such a long time, I guess because people kind of expected more from this. So this tweet got 44,000 likes, and it read, "Why did I think that Katy Perry would stay in space for a few days or weeks? Yeah, not 4 minutes." So you see, the media in particular, and the 6 women who went on this flight really emphasized the first all-female passenger team. Again, they called it crew. It's not crew. They're not technically astronauts. You can't just identify as an astronaut. There's a whole process that I'll get into later in this video, specifically about even commercial astronauts, what you have to do to be considered a commercial astronaut. Jared Isaacman, for example, I believe is kind of a commercial astronaut. He's been to the International, or not the International Space Station, he's been to space on one of SpaceX's Crew Dragon missions, the Polaris Dawn mission. It was on the Crew Dragon capsule. So he, I believe, would be considered a commercial astronaut. There are requirements. These women did not meet them. And also, again, I've gotten the requirements. There's also the fact that it was all autonomous. They did not have to do anything. That's why I'm calling them passengers, and that's really the term, because all they did was ride up into space. They didn't have to control anything, right? So they did not operate the spacecraft, so they were not astronauts. So, but we'll get into that later in the video. But the media just made a big deal about this, and it was really wrong to do so. So, also, Katy Perry, for example, suggested that the trip would encourage young girls to go into space in the future. And this is the important part, with no limitations. So we'll get back to that. And, like, we all can agree that it's objectively a good thing to do. That's a good message. We want more women, more people of all kinds in STEM. More women, more minorities, all of that. It's great to have more people in the field. That's objectively a good thing. But if the message that you want to tie to this whole thing, if that's it, then you've got to be prepared for the audience to take this trip at the same level of seriousness as your messaging for it. But it turns out this trip was not exactly the National Astronaut level of serious that we're kind of used to. For instance, Katy Perry said, among other things, space is finally going to be glam, and about how everyone can be an astronaut. And this is where we get into the Alan Shepard controversy with Gayle King, she compared herself to Alan Shepard. She said, like, they were on the same trajectory as Alan Shepard, or in, like, a higher trajectory. But it's like, if y'all don't know who Alan Shepard is, which I assume most people probably do, particularly this point in our history, he was the 5th man to walk on the moon. So Gayle King, a journalist who has no real space experience, never been an astronaut, never been in any sort of those tough environments, all she's done in her life basically is just report on stuff, which is important, but then you can't go and compare yourself to someone who has completely different experiences, completely different levels of experience, has done something that you most likely will never come close to doing in all of your life. I mean, it's really just insulting, and I think as a journalist, Gayle King should know better. I mean, it's ridiculous. It just makes her look bad. So, like, to be an astronaut, it takes roughly 15 to 20 years for an astronaut. This is where we get into kind of the requirements and everything. So 15 to 20 years for an astronaut who wants to go to space for all of their training, including 46 years at university. They need at least a bachelor's degree, so that's at least 4 years. Most of them get a master's degree. A lot of them anyway, that's the 6 years. Some of them, have doctorates, PhDs, whatever, and that's even more, right? So lots of education. And that's just university alone. So you want to know how long they trained for. These people, Katy Perry, Gayle King, Lauren Sánchez, there was a couple other people who nobody talks about because they're not particularly famous. I think they might have been like, I don't know, Blue Origins people or something. I don't know. But, yeah, so there's this crew of 6. But how long they trained for 2 days. So even using the word astronaut, again, with all the requirements, what you have to do to become an astronaut, that's wild. So, but maybe it's just a little joke. So, and fair enough, so there's nothing wrong with that, but I think the discomfort that we're all feeling watching this right now is due to, on the one hand, them suggesting this is some significant achievement and a moment for all women, while simultaneously it being a space tourist flight, which didn't actually require them to do anything. Again, as I said, the capsule is completely autonomous. They never piloted anything. They never controlled the capsule at any point ever in the flight, which is something that you do as an astronaut. So they didn't have to do anything apart from get in. This post got 16 million views, and all it said was, Katy Perry kissing the ground after returning home from her 11-minute flight to space. So, remember the astronauts that were stuck on the International Space Station? Butch and Sunita? They were stuck there for 9 months. They went through everything to become astronauts. They were actually NASA astronauts. They were stuck up there on the International Space Station for 9 months. When they came back, there was no kissing the ground. There was no, proclaiming to the media that you made some history or something, even though they did. Unfortunately, like, they weren't, I believe that's got to be some kind of history, but they were never setting out to do that, and they never proclaimed that this was some big moment. They were just glad to be home. Remember, this was the Boeing Starliner flight. Originally, they went up on that one, and there were all of the issues with that. They were only going to be up there for a week, right? So maybe that's part of it. It's really just that they were just glad to be home after all this time that they weren't supposed to be in space. They were in space for like 8 months and 3 weeks longer, roughly, than was planned. and there's no, complaining, no shouting to the media, even though they did end up doing interviews, but it was all about eventually their experience and what they would have done to get home and what that whole experience was like for them. Never like this whole, media parade faux history thing. So there's also the fact that this mission, unlike the non-celebrity space missions that we're used to, this one was essentially just one big marketing campaign for Blue Origin's for-profit aerospace company, Blue Origin. So the whole business structure for Blue Origin is to sell space tourism. That's the whole idea. And tickets to go on one of these trips reportedly cost $200,000 to $500,000 each. And there are people that have paid, $1 to $2 million as well. So previously, someone paid $1 million to do one of these. So when Katy Perry says that, she hopes to be an inspiration for young girls to travel to space without limitations, $500,000, $1 million seems like a pretty big limitation. Not everybody has that kind of money. So that is a pretty big limitation. This tweet read, "Call me a pessimist, but I'm sick of the billion-dollar space flights where people are starving and homeless on the ground. It's giving Hunger Games. Capital." In fact, it's not just the regular folk online talking about this. Celebrities have also started sharing their thoughts online, too. Emily Ratajkowski criticized the mission, saying, "And you're going up in a spaceship that is built and paid for by a company that single-handedly is destroying the planet. How many resources went into putting these women into space? For what? Like, what was marketing?" And Olivia Wilde said on an Instagram story reacting to Katy Perry kissing the ground, saying, "Billions of dollars bought us some pretty good memes." Well, I guess, but that's all it is. It means nothing. Like, what, for the memes, for the controversy? It's a publicity stunt. That's literally all it is. That's why this means nothing. So, they even said that Jeff Bezos was faking it. So, there was this whole controversy about, first of all, again, as I said, there's the fact that they're not astronauts. They never actually had to pilot anything. It was autonomous. But then, also coming back, the capsule didn't have really any soot on it. When they were opening it, they actually opened it from the inside, but then they closed it again so that Jeff Bezos could open it. I mean, that's just the most, pretentious, egotistical move. Like, who cares at this point? And that's all it is. It's a marketing campaign and an ego trip for Jeff Bezos. I mean, it's ridiculous. I'm quite frankly so over this. I seriously hope that in the future we don't have all this drama with these, because again, these are fairly common, as I've said, but they hardly ever really make the headlines. They make the headlines because they're not common enough that it's completely routine. It's not like SpaceX going to the International Space Station, like doing resupply missions. So it does make some headlines because it's about who's going, and there's sometimes some sort of issue like this, but this just got wrapped up in a whole mess of controversy. And it's unfortunate because if they had played this differently, maybe it could have been inspiring. But if you really want it to be inspiring, get some random lady, someone who nobody knows. Or just or maybe some lady who's studying aerospace engineering, or someone who has some other job at NASA or something that's not maybe not an astronaut or not really involved with the aerospace engineering part of it. That could be really inspiring. Maybe it's some, janitor or something. That's a way to make it inspiring, not just all of these celebrity ego trips. I mean, this is just, it's horrible publicity. So, Katy Perry also said that zero gravity was wild for those 4 minutes, and she said that the journey allowed her to love herself, because, you have to trust yourself on this journey, what you're doing is you find the love for yourself, she said, because you've got to trust in yourself on this journey, and then you're feeling the love when you come down, for sure. And there's this feeling of strength, so I feel really connected to that strong, divine feminine right now. Yeah, that's an actual quote, unfortunately. So I think if they didn't market this whole thing with this, like, empowering and serious tone, I don't know that anybody would have really, like, roasted it online. I don't think people would have really batted an eye if they didn't really say anything about it. I don't know how much people would have cared. Again, it would have made the headlines for one day because it happened, and it happened to major people, right, and a major company, but then it would have gone away. But they had to make this whole controversy about it, and I think it really just tainted their message, and even beyond tainted it, it attached a different message to it that they really didn't want. It was the opposite of what they wanted. Instead of empowerment, it was like, we shouldn't do this again. So it's just really bad. It's a really bad look for justifying investing in commercial spaceflight when this is the outcome. Like, seriously? It's just ridiculous. And the Wendy's account, as I said in response, I think really gets to the heart of this issue. They said, once she landed, can we send her back? And they've also said things like, when we said women in STEM, this isn't what we meant. And I think it is a little harsh, particularly the women in STEM thing. I mean, Katy Perry, she has the money, she can do whatever she wants. That's really not the issue. The issue is she made, then along with all of the controversy that Jeff Bezos had, and with Blue Origin and everything that happened with the conspiracy theories around the launch itself, it really just took away from what the launch should have been. It could have been a cool moment for women in STEM. It could have just been a routine space flight, but instead, Jeff Bezos and Katy Perry had to make them, and Gayle King had to make it all about themselves. And so now we have all this controversy, and it really just detracts from the whole thing, and it makes people not want to do this, not want to invest in commercial spaceflight, and it's really just, it's a bad look for everyone involved. So hopefully we can move on from stuff like this. Anyway, that's my thoughts on it. What do you think? What do you think about what Katy Perry said, what Gayle King said, the whole controversy, these conspiracy theories, and Wendy's response? Share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.